Administrator, there are some wizards hailing us.
Wizards? Did they come from the moon? Anyway, what do they want?
They say they need some science to help enhance their latest adventure in space.
Now that we can do. Dear viewer, welcome to my moon base. If you are watching this video, you're a big old nerd, most likely of the Dungeons-y and Dragons-y variety. And I'm pleased to inform you that that is the reason that we are in space today. The next fantastic Dungeons and Dragons setting is in Spelljammer Adventures in Space. New campaigns brimming with spaceships and gravity planes and spell-slinging squid brain-sucky guys. To adequately prepare your party for your next adventure in this setting, I have been personally contracted to give you science-savvy DMs out there a little bit more science to add to your next adventure.
Administrator, the wizards are now sending us a D20?
What, they're sending like a die to space? Put it on screen! Sheesh, they really are sending us something to critical role with from Earth's surface. Ooh, it ascends. How about while we wait for our terrestrial 20 to get here, we start the science.
Now entering the facility.
Your adventures in the astral plane will begin aboard a so-called spell-jamming ship, like this one, which can travel 100 million miles throughout wild space in just 24 hours, which of course gives it an average velocity of a little over 1,800 kilometers per second, a little over 0.5% the speed of light. Now, this is wickedly fast. It's 10 times faster than the fastest made human object, NASA's Parker Solar Probe, but it would still take you over 700 years to get to the nearest star in our galaxy at this velocity. So, science-savvy DMs will want to keep this travel time in mind if you know the distance between your wild space systems. And speaking of traveling between those systems, because spell jamming movements can reportedly cause space sickness in its riders, you're going to want to keep a particular acceleration and deceleration in mind. Anything above 1g for sustained periods of time, humanoid bodies don't handle very well. So you DMs are going to want to bake in an extra 52.74 hours of acceleration and deceleration time to your destination. You have to do both. And speaking of time limits, what would happen if I fell off a ship like this, outside of its protective atmosphere? Teleport! Should you ever find yourself floating outside of a protective atmosphere, dear traveler, never fear. A protective air envelope will form immediately around your head. Now, why is it in the shape of a cube and not a sphere, as the laws of physics would dictate? Magic. As stated by the Astral Adventurer's Guide, once this protective air bubble forms around you, you have 1 minute before you start to suffocate. However, even in small spaces, as we learned from our previous episode about the bag of holding, you have a lot more breathability than you may think. For example, in a cube this size for a medium-sized humanoid like you, you'd actually have 125 cubic feet of air in there, which is more than the bag of holding has, which has a 10-minute time limit. A science-savvy DM, going back to the equation that we use in that bag of holding episode, would be able to give someone like you days to weeks of breathability if they wanted to. Of course, you would need the carbon dioxide exhalation rate on hand for every creature you ever ran into during your adventures. But of course you have that, you nerds. Let's see how our space-faring dice is, faring. Okay, looks like it's definitely in the upper atmosphere of Earth now. Not much further until one of my laser bee swarms can head out and grab it.
Speaking of which, the laser beehive is trying to achieve hive mind sentience again.
Son of a beasting! Alright, I'm heading back to base now. Wait, why'd I have to pass a skill check for this? I'll be right back.
And now, a moment of science.
Hey, have you ever thought about why your favorite space sci-fi needs something like teleportation or wormholes or hyperspace to work? Well, it's not just because those concepts are cool, they are. It's because these stories literally could not be told in the same way without a little rule bending. Space is unimaginably vast. Not even light can traverse any small part in the universe in anything like a human lifetime. If you were to live to 100 years old and you could travel at the speed of light, which you can't, the furthest you could ever travel just in our own galaxy is represented by this tiny dot. Just that. That's how far you could go, which is a breakout of this small square of the Milky Way galaxy. If you were to have something like a galaxy-wide civilization, you simply must increase the radius of this circle. Think of how inconsequential a galactic Senate decision in one arm of the galaxy would be if it takes literally 100,000 years for any information to make it to the other end of the galaxy. Simply put, without something breaking the apparent speed of light, you can't have normal wars, adventures, economies, politics. Space is big. Keep this in mind, Dungeon Masters. Put a bunch of little lasers on some tiny robots, they said. It'll move asteroids around. It'll be fun, they said. Jeez. Speaking of putting out fires, fire is something the science enthusiast DM is going to have to consider in wild space. Now, canonically, there's no air in wild space, but magical fire can still exist. This is important because in space, fire behaves a little weird. Now, on Earth, in an atmosphere with gravity and weight and density, flames are pulled up into a more conical shape as hot air rises. But in microgravity and in wild space, therefore, this shape disappears. Fire in space becomes spherical, as experiments on the International Space Station prove. Fuel is pulled in from all directions equally in a space flame, and not just mostly from the bottom. So Dungeon Masters, when you're considering something like a fireball in wild space, it will actually have a different effective radius that you can decide, which will impact your adventures, and it will look downright otherworldly. You're welcome, space fan artists of Dungeon. Teleport! Gravitational considerations are the last science-y augmentation spell that I'd cast on any astral adventurer willing to listen to me at length as I talk about things that really interest me. In wild space campaigns, every irregularly shaped object, everything that's not a planet or large spherical mass, has a so-called gravity plane that cuts horizontally through objects and is two-directional. You could stand on the bottom of this ship just as easily as you could the top, for example. And if you fell off the side of this ship, you would oscillate back and forth across the plane until somebody grabbed you. That sounds silly, but there is a space kernel of space truth here. If you were able to arrive at the center of mass of a massive object, like a planet, and nothing got in your way, the same thing would happen. Dig a hole all the way through Earth and jump in, for example, and you would indeed oscillate back and forth through the hole as aggregate gravitational forces changed direction until air resistance slowed you all the way down. And once you stopped, you would just be floating there. And once you are floating there, you wouldn't be able to move without taking off some of your clothes or weapons and chucking them in the opposite direction, as astronauts delightfully pranking each other like this proves. Yes, what I'm saying is that you could throw someone overboard your spell-jamming ship and you could make it a kind of gravitational walk the plank kind of thing where they oscillate between the gravity plane in the air envelope outside of the ship until they come to rest, and the only way for them to get back to the ship would be for them to get dang space naked and throw their weapons and their clothes in an opposite direction to give them some momentum. Look, I'm not saying that this would be hilarious to do to your party and to enemies that you want to embarrass. I'm just saying it would be hilarious and accurate, which is arguably more important.
Administrator, the D20 from the Wizards is now in range.
Perfect. Put it on screen. So let's recap. If you want to add some science to your astral adventures, factor in accurate travel times based on your true velocity in wild space. Accelerate and decelerate at safe for humanoid rates and factor in those times as well. Give players a bit more time in the void according to their more voluminous air envelopes. Consider a space fireball's more spherical nature when attempting to disintegrate a space squid. And finally, use gravity planes to your advantage. It will make for some pretty fun situations. Ooh, it's so cold because it was just in space and now it's in my pocket. Of course, the beautiful thing about a game like Dungeons & Dragons is that you can do whatever you want in it. You don't have to do space-time calculations and whatnot like I'm suggesting. However, I'm willing to bet more than a couple space smackaroos that adding a little bit of education and sciencey intrigue to your night will make it that much better. Why trust me, learned wizard? Well, I'm on the moon right now. Are you on the moon? Until next time. Infallible argument.
Now exiting the facility.
Thank you so much to Wizards of the Coast for sponsoring today's episode. And if you get up to any sciencey hijinks out there in wild space, we want to hear about it at the facility. Make sure to tag us or me and tell me what you got up to up there. If you want to join the facility, if you want to drape on a silky white lab coat, if you want videos early, if you want to see bloopers, if you want private monthly members-only live streams with yours truly with his hair down, but not like that, you go to patreon.com/Kyle Hill and join the facility today. And hey, if you support us just enough, you get your name on Aria here each and every week. And as you can see, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of you, and there's no way I'm going to be able to pass the time. Look, I'm not saying any of this. Look, Wizards. Just because we did business here and I gave you some like accurate equations and stuff, I'm not saying the next edition of Spelljammer has to include everything that we said here today, but I have space lawyers and I'm just saying they got tentacles where their lips should be. It's not a threat. Hey, thanks for watching. Okay.